There's a moment that happens within minutes of almost every paycheck landing, and most people never notice it happening. It's the moment that quietly decides whether someone is going to be wealthy in 10 years or standing in exactly the same spot they're in right now. It has almost nothing to do with how much that person earns. It has everything to do with the order in which the money moves once it hits their account. Take Renata and Marcus. Same company, same department, salaries close enough that it wouldn't matter if you swapped their pay stubs. Marcus gets paid, feels his checking account balance jump, and spends the next few days quietly catching up on things he's been wanting. Renata gets paid and barely notices, because by the time she opens her banking app, most of that money has already moved somewhere else. 10 years from now, one of them will have built real financial security. The other will still be waiting for a raise big enough to finally fix things. This is the story of why, and it starts with a sequence almost nobody is taught. I'm John, and this channel exists for exactly this kind of thing. Personal finance and investing broken down into steps that actually make sense, without the jargon and without the guesswork. If that's useful to you, stick around and subscribe, because this is the kind of documentary we make often. Marcus's first mistake isn't spending money, it's what he does with his debt. Like most people, he pays what he can when he remembers to, sometimes a few days late. He doesn't realize that two things make up the majority of his credit score: whether he pays on time and how much of his available credit he's actually using. Miss enough payments or carry high balances, and that score drops fast. And a low score doesn't just cost you a rejected credit card. It shows up later as a worse rate on a car loan, a higher security deposit on an apartment, sometimes even a job application. So the very first move, before anything else, is making sure every minimum payment on every debt, credit cards, student loans, car payments, is covered automatically. Not paid off yet, just covered. This step isn't about becoming debt-free overnight. It's about treading water so nothing sinks you while you build the rest of the system. And that word, automatically, is really the whole secret to everything that follows. Renata doesn't have more willpower than Marcus. She just removed herself from the decision. Every payday, transfers move on their own. Before she can second-guess, a spontaneous dinner can talk her out of it. This is the part people underestimate the most. You can't spend money you never see. Most banks and brokerages let you schedule these transfers to happen the same day you get paid, which means the entire system you're about to learn can run itself. 15 minutes of setup now saves years of relying on discipline you may not always have. Once debt is being handled and the system is automated, the next question is simpler than it sounds. How much does it actually cost you to live? Not what you'd like to spend, what it costs to keep the lights on, the rent paid, the car insured, food in the fridge. Marcus has never actually added this up. Renata has, down to the dollar, and keeps that exact number sitting in her checking account at all times, plus a small cushion on top so an unexpected bill doesn't throw everything off. This is your operating budget, and separating it clearly from your everyday spending money is what keeps a normal month from quietly becoming an expensive one. A useful starting split is roughly half your income toward needs, 30% toward wants, and 20% toward saving and investing. Though if you live somewhere expensive, needs might eat closer to 60%, and that's fine. The goal isn't a perfect ratio. It's knowing your own numbers instead of guessing. Here's where most people stop, and where the two paths really start to separate. Once your operating costs are covered, the next dollar doesn't go toward fun, and it doesn't go toward investing either, not yet. It goes toward an emergency fund, money that exists purely so that a car repair, a medical bill, or a sudden job loss never turns into a credit card balance. The old advice used to be 3 months of expenses. Given how unpredictable layoffs and cost of living increases have become, aiming for 4 to 6 months is a smarter target now. If your monthly needs run around $2,500, that puts your goal somewhere between $10,000 and $15,000. That number can feel enormous, so break it into a first milestone, maybe $5,000, and build from there. Keep this money in a high-yield savings account, somewhere it earns real interest while staying completely accessible, because an emergency fund you can't reach in an emergency isn't doing its job. This is usually the step Marcus skips, and it's the reason one unexpected expense can unravel months of progress for him, while Renata barely feels it. Once that cushion exists, it's finally time to start building wealth instead of just protecting what you have. And the best place to start is almost always your employer's retirement plan, a 401k in the US, a workplace pension in the UK, superannuation in Australia, an RRSP in Canada. The principle is identical everywhere. If your employer matches a portion of what you contribute, that match is money you're leaving behind if you don't claim it. It's not a bonus. It's part of your compensation. Beyond the match, contributing around 10 to 15% of your income here is a reasonable target, and current contribution limits typically rise a little each year, so it's worth checking the exact figure for where you live before you set your contribution rate. The trade-off is that this money is generally locked away until retirement age, which can feel restrictive in your 20s or 30s, but that restriction is also what makes it powerful. Someone contributing consistently over several decades into a diversified stock index, even at a modest 10% of a modest salary, can end up with a retirement balance in the millions, purely from time and consistency doing the work that timing the market never could. With retirement contributions moving automatically, attention turns back to any high-interest debt still sitting around, and this is where people get stuck choosing between two competing strategies. One method knocks out the debt with the highest interest rate first, which saves the most money mathematically but can feel slow if that balance happens to be large. The other clears the smallest balance first, regardless of interest rate, trading some efficiency for the psychological win of watching a debt disappear completely. Neither is wrong. Marcus tried the mathematically optimal method once, got discouraged 3 months in when nothing seemed to be shrinking, and gave up entirely. Renata used the smaller balance method, felt herself gaining momentum after clearing just one account, and rode that motivation until everything was gone. The right method is whichever one you'll actually stick with, and if the debt remaining carries a low interest rate, say 4 or 5%, it's worth asking whether paying it off aggressively is really the best use of that money, since investing it instead could realistically earn more over time. That's a math question, but it's also a peace of mind question, and only you can weigh which matters more to you. From here, growing wealth becomes less about restriction and more about direction. After the employer match is captured, a Roth-style retirement account is usually the next stop because money inside it grows completely tax-free. You contribute with income you've already paid tax on, but every dollar of growth after that, decades of compounding, comes out untouched by taxes in retirement. Contribution limits here are lower than a 401k, generally in the range of $7,000 to $8,000 a year depending on your age. So once that's maxed out, additional investing usually flows into a standard taxable brokerage account, where there are no contribution limits and no restrictions on withdrawals, just ordinary capital gains taxes when you eventually sell for a profit. A useful pattern many investors use is keeping higher growth investments inside the tax-free account, since that growth is shielded from taxes anyway, while sticking to simple, low-cost index funds in the taxable account, since they're already efficient. None of this needs to be complicated. Consistency in low-cost index funds over decades has historically outperformed most attempts to pick winning stocks, and that consistency is available to absolutely anyone willing to automate it. The last piece of the system isn't about saving or investing at all. It's about not depending on a single paycheck in the first place. A layoff, an industry disruption, a company restructuring, any of these can undo years of careful budgeting overnight if that one paycheck was your only source of income. Building even one additional stream, freelancing in a skill you already have, dividend-paying investments, a small side business, teaching something you know, doesn't require quitting your job or working nights and weekends indefinitely. A few hours a week is often enough to start, and every dollar it generates can flow straight back into the accounts you've already built, growing your emergency fund faster, increasing your investing contributions, compounding on top of compounding. None of this required Renata to earn more than Marcus. It required her to decide, once, where every paycheck would go, and then let the system run itself from there. That's really the entire lesson hiding inside this whole flowchart. Wealth isn't mostly about income, it's about sequence. The order money moves in, repeated paycheck after paycheck, is what quietly separates the people who build financial freedom from the people who stay one emergency away from starting over. So here's the question worth sitting with. Right now, today, do you actually know where your last paycheck went? Step by step. drop your answer in the comments, because I'd genuinely like to know how many of you have this system already running versus figuring it out for the first time. And if this helped make your own next paycheck a little clearer, subscribe, because there's a lot more of this coming.